I got elves.
All right. Okay. Genesis chapter 31. All right. Now you'll recall, what's that? Yeah, 36 is where we left off. You recall last Wednesday, Laban had just chased down Jacob, searched all the tents, searched Rachel's tent, but at this point, Rachel is sitting on Laban's little household idols on the camel and gives him the line about, well, I kind of got the cramps right now. I can't get down off the camel. And Laban decides he don't want to get anywhere near her, which in their culture at that time was not that at all that unusual. So that just tells us how conniving and smart Rachel was at this point, and that's where we left off at. And it never occurs to Laban that his daughter Rachel might be the one that swiped his idols. So, verse 37. Now, this is Jacob that speaks to him. Or, excuse me, verse 36, I'm sorry. It says, then Jacob became angry and contended with Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my transgression? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? Though you have felt through all my goods, what have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. Now notice at this point how Jacob sets this up. He doesn't just say, set it here between all the relatives and what have you. He says, between your kinsmen and my kinsmen. Well, weren't they the same people? They essentially were the same people. But there's a distinction being made here that instead of ours, our relatives, Jacob at this point does not want to associate himself with Laban in the sense of, well, these are our people, but rather my kinsmen and your kinsmen. Even though they're the same people, there's a distinction being made that, as we saw last week, from this point forward, you're seeing a separation between the descendants of Nahor and Abraham.
Jacob is establishing his own household.
He's establishing his own lineage here, apart from Laban. And in fact, from this point forward, nobody, from this generation on, nobody goes back to Haran looking for a wife. This is it. As far as we know, from this time forward, never again do these two branches of the family have any interaction with each other. All right, verse 38 says, these 20 years. Now you notice we mentioned earlier, we knew Jacob had served 14 years for his two wives. But nowhere at all had we been told up until this point how long he'd been working to breed, his flock and of the sheep and the goats and whatever else he's taking with him. This is the first reference we have to a total of 20 years, which tells us he stayed for another 6 years just breeding the flock. It says, these 20 years I've been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten the rams of your flocks. That which was torn of beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. you required it of my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Now, in their culture, apparently there was a cultural practice that if you were a shepherd and a wild animal attacked the flock, as long as you had enough of a carcass to prove that, there had been an animal, you could bring the carcass to the owner of the flock, proving that it had been attacked by an animal, and it would be the owner of the flock that would have to count the loss. He couldn't hold the shepherd accountable for it. What Jacob is saying here is that any animals that have been lost from attacks by wild animals, excuse me, any wild animals, I didn't bring to you. I took the loss. Which by law, at that point, Jacob was not required to do. But there's something else that might be afoot here. If Jacob assumed the loss himself, now on the one hand, he might simply be, have been benevolent and they'd say, well, I won't charge it off to Laban. I'll just take the loss. But what's the other possibility, or what the other motivation for why Jacob may have been motivated to take the loss himself?
So that Laban wouldn't come out and start keeping count?
Maybe. But at this point, in Jacob's mind, who's the real owner of the flock now? He is. That may be the real motivation behind why Jacob didn't bother bringing any losses to Laban's attention, because since he started breeding the flock specifically to breed those that are going to be his, Jacob has considered this is his flock, not Laban's.
God bless you.
What's that?
I said, God bless you.
Now, of course, Laban has shown up demanding that, an explanation as to why Jacob, absconded with his daughters and his flock. In Jacob's eyes, this flock wasn't Laban's. Laban absconded with what should have been Jacob's flock 6 years earlier, and he's been breeding what was left of Laban's flock since then, and everything, remember, that was striped or speckled, multicolored by their agreement was Jacob's. And this whole flock that Jacob's got now, well, what color do you think they are?
Must have been a strange looking flock.
Yeah. The whole flock is all speckled and spotted and what have you. Otherwise, if there'd have been any solid colored ones in here, Jacob's told him, said, if you find anything that belongs to you, claim it now. Well, obviously, Jacob knew there weren't any solid colored ones in the flock, or he wouldn't have made that agreement. So Jacob knows this is his flock. That's the reason why for the last few years, he's now telling Laban that any that got killed by wolves or wild animals, I didn't bring to you. I took the loss. Because by law, they were already Jacob's now to begin with. All right. Verse 40. Thus I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I've been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you changed my wages 10 times. By the way, it said, heat consumed me, the frost by night. What's that tell you about the climate of where they were?
Deserty.
Yeah, it does get cold up there.
Hot in the daytime and cold at night.
It was an area that was not by any means a tropical environment. But it apparently got cold in what today would be northern Syria. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac. Now, by the way, let me stop here. Because the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac. This is a new title that's now been given to God. How many times have we seen the Bible refer to God as the fear of Isaac? First time we've heard this. Why is God referred to here by Jacob as the fear of Isaac?
Because God at one point required Isaac to be sacrificed.
Could very well possibly be the reason behind that. We know he's talking about God, but he refers to him as the fear of Isaac. So, yeah, Isaac had plenty of reason to consider that. But there is still one thing missing here. The God of my father, who of course is Isaac, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac. There's still one thing missing. Anybody catch it?
He's not saying it's my God.
There it is, right there. He still, even though he knows who God is, and he has spiritually come a long way since, these 20 years that he left home, he still, for some reason, is not referring to God as my God. It's the God of my father, the God of my grandfather. He still hadn't quite figured out that this is also my God. Why do you suppose that is still missing?
He's still on his journey, finding his way to God.
And it could be literally a journey. Is it possible that at this point, even though God has appeared to him multiple occasions, and God told him, no matter where you go, I'll be there, do you think he's still thinking in his mind that his God is back in Canaan? Hard to say, but that's a possibility. But anyway, the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac, had not been for me. Notice again, he doesn't say God's been with me. It's God's been for me.
My version says with me.
Yeah.
Mine says for.
Now the Hebrew word there, actually it could be translated with me. Probably more often translated as a for me. God is his proponent, is for him.
God's on my side.
My
Not
side.
I'm on God's side. God's on my side.
Now keep in mind, in Hebrew doesn't have prepositions like we do in English. In Hebrew, one single letter or prefix added to a word constitutes a preposition. That particular preposition, yes, in some cases, it can be translated either way. But the most likely translation, probably to be for him. And why? Again, because if he'd have been with me, why is he still talking about God as a God who's out there somewhere? To not be for me or with me. However, it says, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the toil of my hands, so he rendered judgment last night. Now, last night?
Yeah, what happened last night?
What happened last night? Anybody remember?
Laban had the dream.
Yeah. God spoke to Laban and told him, said, you better leave him alone. So he is reminding Laban that God has already spoken to you and told you, you better back off. What's that?
Trying to figure out how did he know that?
Because
remember-
Jacob told him.
Yeah, earlier
Laban told
on,
him.
Laban admitted to him that God had appeared to him in a dream. And we studied that on Wednesday. All right. Now I'm just going to cover another verse or two and then we'll call it quits for the evening.
Verse 29, Karen.
Man. What's that?
Verse 29 was the one where Laban told him that God spoke to him last.
Yeah, verse 29, Laban admitted it to him.
I was hoping we'd get to 51. Never mind. I'll wait till next Wednesday.
Okay. What's so special about verse 51?
I'm trying to figure out why a pillar and a heap are going to be a witness.
It's
Oh,
a
no,
memorial.
It's 52. Sorry, it's 52.
Carpet split in half.
Basically, it's just a memorial. Same sense that if I put up, well, if you're driving down the highway and you see one of those memorial plaques that says, some battle occurred here, or this is the home of, some historical figure, same thing.
Mason-Dixon line.
So the monument isn't. In
It's a
essence,
monument.
A witness. Okay. I guess it makes sense.
Mhm.
Different, strange context of the word witness in my mind, but okay.
But essentially what he's saying is that'll be a memorial that'll remind you. All right,
Sorry for jumping ahead, folks.
we're just going to cover verse 43.
43,
What's that?
43 is interesting.
Yeah. Verse 43, we'll call it quits. It says, Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, The daughters are my daughters. The children are my children. The flocks are my flocks. And all that you see is mine. Well, Laban is just full of himself, isn't he?
Sure.
God's already told him to back off, and Laban cannot get it through his head that Jacob worked for his daughters. He's made an agreement that he held up, to work for the flock, and Laban is still laying claim to every single thing that is there. Do you think Laban really believes this, or is Laban so full of pride that he just can't admit that he just got beat?
He's just full of it.
Or maybe it's a little bit of both.
Or a lot of both.
Laban, because what happens with somebody who basically has made a living off of cheating other people? The one thing that a cheater hates worse
He's getting cheated.
is getting cheated. Yep. A thief can't stand to have somebody steal from him. But in this case, Jacob actually did it honestly, and Laban cannot stand it. So he will not let go of the concept that, they're still my, and it's not just, they're my daughters. Well, that's a fact, but the way he presents it is, I own these daughters, is essentially what he's saying.
All that you see is mine?
Yeah,
That's a pretty haughty statement.
exactly.
Especially after he worked for him for 14 years.
Well, I would say especially after God has, spoken to him and told him, you better back off.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you now. It's amazing God didn't just strike him down at some point here.
Mm-hmm.
He's just basically thumbing his nose up at God.
But is it possible that if Laban has the same theological perspective that a lot of other people did at that point,
That God's back there in Canaan.
that God is back. Now, already they are as far as the hill country of Gilead, which is at the northern part of Canaan, but where in Jacob's mind, and that in 20 years they've had a conversation about this, where do they think God is? He's in southern Canaan, where Abraham and Isaac had lived. They're still in northern Canaan. That's still another 100, 200 miles away. So probably in Laban's eyes, well, we're still out of your God's territory. He can't really touch me here. I can understand that we serve a God who is merciful, but I could really have understand if God just gave him a heart attack right there and said, watch this. But for whatever reason, God was merciful to him and didn't strike him down. But he just comes across and everything you see is mine. It says, but what can I do this day to these my daughters or to their children whom they have borne?
What does he mean by that?
Well, I'll stop there.
He's saying that these are my kids and I really can't do anything to hurt them because I'm a good man and I have a good conscience?
No, I think he does realize that Jacob's God is powerful enough that if God can bless Jacob with all of these things, that God may be strong enough that better hedge my bets here a
Well,
little bit.
especially since God told Laban.
Right. I think that's what he's really getting at. He says, well, what can I do? Your God spoke to me and said,
Yeah.
I better back off. He's thumbing his nose at God, but he's at least
But
smart
he's
enough to
afraid of-
realize that he might be biting off more than he can chew if he tries to follow through with his threat.
So you don't think this is a case of him actually being a man of good conscience? That this is he had God warn him, and now he knows that he better not mess with Jacob. He's been warned.
I think he realizes
Okay.
that, yeah, Jacob may have more going for him than what I'm willing to bite off. I don't want to admit that, but I think Laban knows it. Also, at this point, here's a variable in this that we will never know for sure on this one. This is pure speculation on my part. But having heard the whole story, is it possible that now that, everything's been laid out, he said, let yours and my relatives decide here. Do you think maybe that some of them might have started siding with Jacob, and Laban realized, I might be in the minority here?
Especially considering they've lost their inheritance and everything
Yeah.
else.
And if the older son realizes that the household idols are gone, which was the basically the equivalent of whoever was in possession of those was the designated heir. He figures, okay, our inheritance is now gone. Dad has just now admitted that Jacob's God spoke to him and said, back off. We didn't find any of our stuff with Jacob. And our sisters have turned against us. Maybe we better cut our losses. And you think they might have been looking at their dad and was like, let's go. We need to get out of here.
They knew him his whole life. They know he's a conniver.
Yeah. So, and again, that's part, we can only speculate about that. But I can't help but wonder if Laban realized at this point that he may have been more outnumbered than he was betting on.
And could this whole schism between Jacob and Laban be what cemented the fact that the two sides of that family diverged and
I think that's
never
exactly.
came back together again?
I think that's exactly what this was.
I mean, Laban probably didn't want to have anything to do with Jacob's God at this point.
Probably, well, they as we'll see when we get to verse 51 and 52, they do in fact set up a what essentially is a boundary marker that says your part of the family stays on this side and our part stays on this side. And they had agreed at this point, made a covenant with each other that we'll go our way, you go your way. And, you'll notice that Abraham sent his servant to his relatives to get a wife for Isaac. Isaac, with Rachel or Rebekah's insistence, sends Jacob to go get a wife. That's the last time that happens. You'll notice that as we continue on in our study of Genesis, Jacob doesn't send any of his sons north to go find a wife. I think at that point, Jacob basically, I'm sure, raised his kids from this point forward that whatever you do, don't go back there to find a wife or to live. You need to stay here. And I have no doubt that schism was probably permanent at this point forward because of this agreement.
And when trouble came on them, they went south instead of north.
They went south instead of north. Questions this evening? All right.